So there's a lot of factors at play here. Chris Ross, president of the Montreal Firefighters Association. I was speaking to somebody yesterday from an organization that is very anti-bike path, shall we say, and they're actually looking to challenge the city in court in regards to their plans for bike paths. And they actually referred to specifically bike paths as a possible reason for slower response times for first responders. Do you think there's any truth to that? Is that something you're seeing?
Where bike paths would maybe contribute to slowing the first responders is that it narrows the streets. What we call in English the traffic calming device. It's that psychological concept that as the narrower the street is, the less fast people tend to have a tendency to drive. But when you get into a street where you've replaced, one or two lanes of traffic with a bike lane, or you've increased the width of the curb at the intersection, you've blocked possibilities for cars to move to the side and let the fire truck go through. And you force that fire truck to slow down as well. We have some streets in Montreal, specifically in the winter. I'm thinking of the Plateau. You have a bit of a snowbank on that street, and you don't go down that street unless there's a fire, because the fire truck going down the street means we're pretty much going to take every mirror off of every car that's parked on the street in order to get down it.
Oh, wow. Okay. Chris Ross, president of the Montreal Firefighters Association.
La STM vous souhaite la bienvenue à bord.
This is your stop. In Transit with Elias Mackos, CJAD800.
Robyn Flynn filling in for Elias Mackos. It's no secret that getting around the city can be tricky, shall we say. The Montreal Fire Department Division Chief Guy Lapointe says congestion in the city of Montreal is making their response time slower. New numbers show it may now take up to 15 seconds longer for firefighters to respond to a call. And while 15 seconds may not seem like a lot, first responders say that every single second counts. So here to chat a little bit more about that is Chris Ross, president of the Montreal Firefighters Association. Good morning, Chris. How are you?
Good morning, Robyn. How are you doing?
I'm well. When I see numbers like that, I get a little nervous because the last thing you want is slower response times for firefighters, especially if there's an emergency. Guy Lapointe saying that congestion is to blame for the slower response time. Do you agree with that sentiment?
Well, I would definitely agree response times are going up. That's an overall metric that I think no one can deny. I think you have to put into a little bit of perspective, though, is that it measures the response time 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in the 66 fire stations across the island of Montreal. So there's going to be a huge difference between responding to a call at 3 a.m. and responding to a call at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So, definitely congestion contributes to that. Construction, one-way streets, traffic control, traffic calming devices, anything that slows down a car is obviously going to slow down a fire truck. We're larger, we're slower, and we have a lot less mobility as a car and in regard to going in and out of the traffic.
For sure. Even compared to an ambulance, it's a lot more difficult for, a fleet of fire trucks, perhaps 1, 2, 3 trucks in a row to try and get through traffic. I always get frustrated as a motorist. When I see those flashing lights and I hear the sirens, I do everything in my power to get out of the way so that they can get through the intersection. But I see other motorists just sitting there, and it absolutely drives me crazy. What sort of reaction does a firefighter have in that moment when cars just aren't getting out of the way?
Probably quite a bit of frustration as well, but I think we sort of realize too, because myself sitting in a car, sometimes I hear a siren. It can be very hard to determine where that siren's coming from, in what direction. If you have the radio on, you're talking on the phone, you have some of the newer cars with double insulated glass, that sound, the truck has to get a lot closer now before you hear it. It's one of the reasons in Montreal that we still use mechanical sirens, and we have air horns as well. They tend to transmit a lot farther than the typical siren that you find on a police car and an ambulance.
Okay. When we talk about slower response time, I mentioned that the numbers were showing that it was up to 15 seconds longer for firefighters to respond to a call. And I think for, the average person, they count to 15. They're like, that's not really a big deal. But what does that actually mean in the case of a fire or an emergency? An extra 15 seconds, does that really make a big difference?
It definitely makes a difference. When we're talking about a fire in your house and how quick and rapidly a fire will spread in a modern construction today, where your sofas, your carpets, your floors, and everything has some sort of a plastic gasoline component to it that when exposed to heat, it'll melt and rapidly burn. There's definitely a huge difference compared to 30 years ago when everything was built out of paper and wood, and that fire spread a lot slower. But I think, the more questioning thing in that is to realize, once again, without repeating myself, it's an average over 100 and some odd thousand calls. So 15 seconds demonstrates a trend. But in order to get to 15 seconds, it means there's an intervention somewhere that maybe took a minute, 2 minutes longer. And in order to get a real, understanding of those numbers, you have to make sure you're comparing apples to apples. And overall response time demonstrates a trend. But if we're not measuring the same intervention from point A to point B, you don't really know if that increase is directly related to traffic or something else. What we do know is that in the component of response times, from the truck leaving the station to the truck arriving on scene, it's taking longer. But that could take longer because we have more interventions. That can take longer because we have less fire trucks. That could take longer because there's more fire trucks out of service on a given day. On any given day, Montreal removes a certain number of fire trucks in order to reduce the cost of staffing. Well, if we remove extra trucks today, my response time across the island is definitely going to go up, specifically in those districts where the fire station has lost a fire truck for that shift.
So there's a lot of factors at play here. Chris Ross, president of the Montreal Firefighters Association. I was speaking to somebody yesterday from an organization that is very anti-bike path, shall we say, and they're actually looking to challenge the city in court in regards to their plans for bike paths. And they actually referred to specifically bike paths as a possible reason for slower response times for first responders. Do you think there's any truth to that? Is that something you're seeing?
Where bike paths would maybe contribute to slowing of first responders is that it narrows the streets. What we call in English the traffic calming device. It's that psychological concept that as the narrower the street is, the less fast people tend to have a tendency to drive. But when you get into a street where you've replaced, 1 or 2 lanes of traffic with a bike lane, or you've increased the width of the curb at the intersection, you've blocked possibilities for cars to move to the side and let the fire truck go through. And you force that fire truck to slow down as well. We have some streets in Montreal, specifically in the winter. I'm thinking of the Plateau. You have a bit of a snowbank on that street, and you don't go down that street unless there's a fire, because the fire truck going down the street means we're pretty much going to take every mirror off of every car that's parked on the street in order to get down it.
Oh, wow. Okay. Chris Ross, president of the Montreal Firefighters Association. What do you think can be done to address these issues? It seems like it's completely multi-pronged. There's a million possible reasons for this response time increasing. What is being done by Montreal firefighters to address this?
One of the things Guy Lapointe mentioned that I think our members welcome with open arms is a change to the CJAD dispatch system. We've had a system in place for probably close to the municipal mergers now, so probably around 20 years. That was very ancient, based on telephone lines, and limited in its capacity to dispatch a large number of trucks at the same time. Because when you have an incident in Montreal, you might see a bunch of fire trucks, but often those come from 2 to 3 or 4 different fire stations. And in the event of a larger fire, they might come from 20 fire stations. So the new digital dispatching system that's going into the stations is definitely going to contribute in the sense that it can dispatch the trucks quicker. So, if we can shave a couple of seconds off the preparation time, then it makes up for maybe a little bit more of that time that it takes us to get to the scene. But otherwise, short of our trucks flying one day, there is no miracle that's going to get you through the congestion other than having, more trucks in service, not reducing the staffing in certain fire stations. Because, if we reduce the staffing in Station A, the fire truck for that territory is not going to come from Station B. Well, by default, that response time is going to be 2 to 3 minutes higher. 2 to 3 minutes higher is what is influencing your average overall response time across the island.
Which makes a lot of sense. Chris, we had a text message come in at 514-790-0800 from a 911 dispatcher. We were talking earlier about folks who were using voice cloning software for nefarious purposes to prank people, the grandparent scam, things like that. But this dispatcher says that they receive a lot of AI calls that are not real. Is that something that you're seeing too? Are firefighters being called to fires where there is actually no issue? It was a prank?
I can't say I've heard of that happening very often. I wouldn't be surprised that it's happened at some point. We hear of the famous term for police and, swatting, calling in an issue, so they send a SWAT team. I would imagine similar people would be interested in doing it to the fire department, but on our 130,000 calls in a year, I think it would be an extreme minority that you'd probably count in 1 or 2 hands. And off the top of my head, I can't think of one fire station in the last year that's reported something similar to that to me.
All right. Chris Ross, president of the Montreal Firefighters Association. Thank you so much for your time today, Chris. Really appreciate it.
You take care, Robyn. Have a good day.
You too.